Joining us, a very special guest, Harsh Vardhan Shringla, the former Foreign Secretary of India, also India's G20 Sherpa. Thank you very much, sir, for being with us. You've also served in the United States. You're also aware of very closely as a former Foreign Secretary about how that relationship progressed. To what extent is that the trust that we now have directly linked to the civil nuclear deal which Dr Manmohan Singh pushed through?
So I had the occasion to work with Dr. Manmohan Singh sometimes closely and sometimes by association. It was actually when I was in our permanent mission to the UN that I think there came a break point in our relationship with the United States. And that is when the US asked us to vote in favor of a resolution that was directed against Iran. And this was the Iran nuclear deal, as we remember at that time, the Iran nuclear program.
Yeah.
And we had always, I think, abstained or voted against the resolution. And that period, I think it was 2002, if I'm not mistaken, we were all in New York, the UNGA was on. And Prime Minister Manmohan Singh took that historic decision to support the resolution. And we voted for that resolution against Iran's nuclear program for the first time. And as a result, I think established a level of trust and friendship with the United States, which, as we all know, later led to the US-India nuclear agreement. And so I think Prime Minister Manmohan Singh was subject to extraordinary pulls and pressures within his own coalition, because as we know, in Parliament, they were dependent on a number of parties for support. Otherwise, they would lose the majority. The CPM, if I recall, was very, very strongly opposed to any rapprochement with the US. And I do remember a lot of the action went around the United Nations. So that's how we were actually, as I said, involved through association. And despite the pressures, and I think there was a time in which the deal, the Indo-US nuclear deal, appeared as though it would fall through. But Prime Minister Manmohan Singh put his foot down for the first time and actually said that, either this deal goes through or I'm out. And I think that's when the entire historic India-US relationship, which begins at the turn of the century, that means the last 25 odd years, can be traced back to some of those steps that he took. I would say very courageously at that time, because today a good relationship with the US is a given. Everybody agrees and everybody is on board. But at that time, it was really a transformation in our foreign policy. And he led that transformation and he stood by it. And he stood by it irrespective of whether he loses his seat or not. So that was quite extraordinary.
The civil nuclear deal is also at a time when the world took notice of the fact that India was a nuclear power. In fact, once that deal went through, there was international recognition of the fact that India was a nuclear power. So there was something to be said about India's status changing. And that's important because particularly in fora like the United Nations, whether you are a nuclear power or not a nuclear power stands for a lot, right?
Absolutely. I think, it established India as a nuclear power, despite the fact that we were non-signatories to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. In other words, we were a non-NPT nuclear power. There was an exemption carved out for India. And that exemption came out of that trust that was established because of the actions that took place earlier. And I think that's a very important, point that led to the change and led to India's status changing, and today India being recognized as a responsible nuclear power. All these years down the line, we have actually proven that we have been and are a responsible nuclear power. And I think the trust reposed in us at that time, because of Prime Minister Manmohan Singh, has stood the challenge of time and other issues that came up.
The civil nuclear deal also fed into his vision of an economically powerful India, an economically thriving India. He was, of course, our finance minister many, many years ago. But driving India's economic transition is what he'll be remembered for most. And in a sense, the civil nuclear deal ultimately was meant to fuel that engine, right?
No, absolutely. But I want to take you back to an anecdote linked to your question. I used to be in Paris in the early 1990s. And there was, a group called the Aid India Consortium that met in Paris every year and actually decided the quantum of grants in aid to India, which in other words, our entire balance of payments really depended on how much these countries pledged to us in terms of extra budgetary and other support. And when Prime Minister Manmohan Singh brought about the structural adjustments and liberalized the economy, I remember that for the first time we were not dependent on foreign aid for our balance of payments. We were not dependent on foreign aid for our development, and it was like a breath of fresh air. It was difficult to believe, but I think it happened around the time between 1992 and 1995, and I think it was really when India changed. These are moments in history where there is a pronounced transformation. And again, I think Prime Minister Manmohan Singh has to be given credit for that remarkable change in our economic policy, and the fact that we continue to follow a liberalized policy in terms of the economy is really something that we owe to him. And of course, as you say, the India-US nuclear deal also opened up vistas of cooperation with the United States and with the Western countries that we hadn't envisaged. A lot of FDI came in, and I think India has never looked back since.
You were mentioning France, but then people don't remember so easily that right after the Indo-US civil nuclear deal, he had a fantastic nuclear deal with France as well. The Indo-US nuclear deal didn't sort of put any conditions on India. Neither did the US pressurize India into sticking with them. India did what was right in our self-interest. And with France, also equally an important strategic partner in the nuclear sector, Manmohan Singh also had a huge role.
No, absolutely. I think, it was a turning point even with France. France became a close partner in more than a strategic sense in many areas of defense, areas of business, investments. And I think that again is linked to the nuclear deal that was signed subsequent to the US nuclear deal, and the relationship that Prime Minister Manmohan Singh had with then Prime Minister of France, if I'm not mistaken, it was Nicolas Sarkozy.
Yes, it was.
And you could also see that Prime Minister President Macron has made some very laudatory comments, and I think that really goes back to the time that this relationship, a strong partnership with France, was established in Dr. Manmohan Singh's era.
There was an effort also to try and improve the status of the relationship with Pakistan, but then 2008 happened and the Mumbai terror attacks. And, all of that went entirely onto we almost went to war after that. I would suggest that the real downturn in relations between India and Pakistan, which we've seen extending for such a long period of time, actually began after the Mumbai terror attacks, which took place on his watch.
So Prime Minister Manmohan Singh, here, this is where I was able to see him more closely, because I was Joint Secretary in Delhi dealing with SAARC. And at that time, we were going to have the SAARC summit in Thimphu in Bhutan. And we were preparing for that summit. And I remember Prime Minister Manmohan Singh saying that I want to do something for the region. I want to bring these countries closer together, and I want to really create something that is of lasting impact for the rest of South Asia, so that everybody in South Asia can benefit. And the idea of a South Asian university came from Dr. Manmohan Singh. But I also recall that Pakistan did its best to scuttle that project. In fact, it was so watered down ultimately that he, at the end of the day, was very, very disappointed. I mean, I'm saying this firsthand because I saw it myself. He was very disappointed at the approach and attitude of Pakistan. Here was someone who was making the gesture to reach out to a place that he had originally belonged to. He was saying that let be bygones. We should live amicably. The region should live in peace and harmony. And let's do something that can bind our people together. And here was the deep state and the Pakistani establishment that worked assiduously to make sure that didn't happen. And that culminated, as you correctly pointed out, in the 2008 Mumbai terrorist attacks. And I think that was the break point with Pakistan, where it was conclusively proved that the Pakistani state had organized, orchestrated, and implemented that attack in great detail. And that I think Pakistan would always consider us an inimical country, an enemy state, and that there was no scope to establish closer relations without a reaction from the deep state and those elements in Pakistan that would be intrinsically opposed to any relationship with India, and that continues even today, and I think with good reason.
Thank you, sir, very much for speaking to us, sharing your experience as a Foreign Service officer, sometimes even well before you were Foreign Secretary, and your experience with Manmohan Singh. Thank you very much, sir, for being with us.